This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rapid. With me this week, two fantastic human beings, Nick White.
Hey.
And Kait Lamphere.
Hi.
Thank you both for joining me this week. This is officially the last I Read Comic Books episode of 2019, which is kind of crazy because next week's episode is actually going to be airing on the 1st, so we've got a whole thing. But, if you're listening to this, technically it's Christmas in the United States and across the rest of the world, unless you're forward in the time zone. But I'm not going to figure that out. It is technically Christmas today that this episode comes out. So if you celebrate Christmas, happy Christmas. If not, happy regular Wednesday for you. So, I'm going to do the thing that I do every single week, and I'm going to ask Kait and Nick how they've been, how have comic books been. So let's start with Kait.
I've been great. I've been really trying to do the Goodreads 2019 reading challenge, and I don't know if I'm going to make it at this point.
You have a week left, Kait.
I know.
How many books do you have left on your list?
Half of it.
Oh, no.
Oh, my God.
So you just took off the rest of this week or rest of this year so that you could do this, right? You just took that off from work?
That would have been a really great idea, but I did not do that.
Well, Godspeed.
Thank you. I'm going to try. I did read Under the Moon, A Catwoman Tale, which is not part of the reading challenge.
Nice.
Okay,
nice.
not a
I've
step
heard
in the
that's
right
very
direction.
That's by Lauren Miracle and Isaac Goodhart. I basically know nothing about Catwoman except for the occasional when she shows up in the movies, basically.
So you just know Anne Hathaway, right?
Michelle Pfeiffer,
yeah, basically.
And Michelle Pfeiffer.
Yeah. But I've heard that this is a really great book. It was on the Goodreads Choice Awards for 2019, which is separate from our group.
Oh, cool.
It's
That's
all
cool.
Goodreads. My whole life is Goodreads.
Mm-hmm.
It did lose to Pumpkinheads, which probably tells you that the majority of the users on Goodreads are teenage girls, or at least younger adults.
Sure.
I did really end up liking this book, though. It's got it all. It's got a tragic backstory, a diverse cast of supporting characters like a Ravenclaw type hacker and a Hufflepuff type parkour teacher, and then Catwoman someplace in the middle. She steals things, but she's really brave. So
Okay, I thought you were going to keep going with the Harry Potter analogy of she's a Slytherin, but also a Gryffindor.
that's exactly what my thinking was. I was like, I need the sorting hat for this one.
That's great.
She's got a really great character arc. She ends up helping a young girl in the book that really I don't know if she reminds her of herself, but I definitely saw parallels in the two characters. And
Okay.
in this book, she goes by Cat Girl, and she really insists on going by Cat Girl. But at some point, her friends are like, "But what's your name?" And she's like, "My name is Cat Girl. What are you talking about?" Anyway, this has definitely sparked my interest in more Catwoman stories, but considering that this is a YA graphic novel, I really don't know where to go from here. I imagine that the rest of the stories about Catwoman are about Catwoman, as in the adult.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if there's a great jumping on point from this point.
I have no idea. I think we have to consult our resident DC young adult oriented comic book expert, Kara Shamborsky. But my guess is that she would say, forget about Catwoman, just read Young Justice or Teen Titans or something like that. Because I know that that's in the same kind of vein of YA, not necessarily YA, but very drama oriented stuff, kind of like YA books can be. So I don't know. That's my best guess. But Nick, what about you? How have you been? How have comic books been?
Things have been fine. I feel like we've hit that point in the year that I think a lot of people hit where you're starting to panic and figure out exactly what your holiday plans are. And I realize that's kind of a privileged position because I suppose there are some people out there who aren't trying to figure out which relative they're going to go visit because some of their relatives have said you can't come back after what you did last year. Mm-hmm. And okay, so some people, that's what happens. But again, like I said, I'm in a privileged position where it's kind of a juggling of who's going to go where and who's going to see who and who's going to get seen before Christmas or after or get pushed off into the new year if you're on a low tier of family ranking. I don't know. So that kind of panic is setting in. So that's great, which is maybe why I've been reading comic books instead of actually trying to solve my real world problems. And in that regard, I read Prodigy: The Evil Earth. This is written by Mark Miller, or by those of you who look at the word and say, "Can't you read?" Mark Millar. Drawn by Raphael Albuquerque, colors by Marcelo Maiolo, and letters by Pete Doherty. And the main reason I really just picked this book up is because I just haven't seen Raphael Albuquerque's art in, gosh, quite a long time. I'm sure someone who's listening to this is angrily shouting at their phone or podcatcher or whatever, he was just on this. Well, guess what, guys? I don't have Comic Book DB anymore. It's gone.
Exactly.
I tried to go there out of desperation like 2 days after I knew it was closed, and maybe there was a fluke or some last minute reprieve, but it's gone. So there's nowhere else on the internet to get that information, and so that's just a problem. But yeah, to Mark Miller's credit, he always finds a way of pairing himself with really talented artists. And so sometimes when I'm just not keen on Miller, or even if I'm aware of the premise of the book and I just don't love that, sometimes he'll just be paired with someone where I'm like, okay, I'm just mainly going to read it for that. And so I saw this on Hoopla, and the trade came out in July of 2019. And as the book suggests, the main character, Edison Crane, is in fact a prodigy. He helps win his prep school's polo final despite being 6 years younger than everybody else on the team. He learns martial arts simply by watching the movies on TV and mastering the muscle movements. He performs open heart surgery on his childhood friend, which, if that's your version of like a play date, I guess that works, but that happens. He simultaneously participates in 8 games of chess at the World Championship. He jumps the Grand Canyon on a motorcycle on fire with no parachute and abandoning the bike halfway. He learns from Chinese masters how to channel chi balls.
What does jumping over the Grand Canyon on a motorcycle have to do with being a prodigy?
Right.
I'm confused.
So apparently the premise here is that he gets a lot of letters from fans in the mail, and he has this one fan who keeps coming up with all these escalating crazy ideas where the only way you're going to truly enact or play out this murder scenario, suicide scenario of sorts, is if you're smart enough to concoct a way in which you can do it and not die. And of course, there are other things here where we get the idea that he's truly learned how to master body and soul, because, as I said, he's apparently Goku as well.
Okay.
In terms of the ki or chi balls or whatever. GIF, who cares?
Yeah.
Fuck everyone getting mad right now about that. And so, yeah, does it feel like it's the beginning of Iron Man? Yeah, it does feel like the beginning of Iron Man, yes. So he ends up in this whole globe-trotting adventure. The Australian government is like, hey, we have a problem. Cars are materializing out of nowhere. And it's a bizarre situation because the cars are for brands that have never existed on Earth. And they have license plates for states that have never existed in the United States. And the cars are filled with animals in cages that are dead. And if that sounds like something very bizarre, that's because it's a fucking mystery, and now it's the whole crux of the book, okay? Like,
okay,
why is this happening?
So what's the point of this book is that this guy's just really cool. I'm confused as to where the hook is into the story of however long this volume was.
Right. So the premise is that he's a very smart guy. His dad, I think, was a senator, and then he became like Secretary of State. And his dad is very much like, look at this path that I've carved for you. Basically, more or less, you can probably go on to be president, right? And
okay,
this kid, Edison Crane, he's much more interested in kind of following all these like mysteries and people that are trying to like tie him into all these different like unsolved events and things like that. And as a result, his dad disinherits him, hands him $1 coin and says like, that's all you're going to get from me. And so, yeah, it basically turns into something along the lines of National Treasure or Mission Impossible, where we're, like, learning ancient secrets about the government and breaking into, high-security buildings. And
okay. This is a hard
a lot
left.
of that. As he's trying to solve this mystery. And if it seems like, gee, this is, like, tailor-made for becoming a movie or a TV show, all you need to do is remember that Mark Miller has a big bucks contract with Netflix at this point, and you go, well, okay, that seems to add up. I'm just really intrigued that Mark Miller has written a book in which the protagonist isn't a sexually frustrated, violently prone Caucasian man in his low 20s. I guess I should mention the main character, Edison Crane, is African American. So in that sense, I think it's great because Miller's protagonists have, at least for what I've read of Miller, have been pretty narrowly defined within a very small subset of characteristics. So it's great to see him branching out, even if it maybe feels a little superficial and not as in-depth and well-rounded of a character. I mean, I would say there is like one defining difference in characteristic, which is the idea that Edison is smart enough to obviously understand that sheer intelligence and violence aren't like the only two ways to solve problems. He genuinely seems to have a real sense of empathy, and a lot of people that he finds along the way that are broken, or like a soldier who has PTSD, he tries to like find ways to get them working for him or helping him out, or like sort of a mutual you help me, I help you sort of thing. So that's
Gotcha.
kind of nice. We'll see if this gets a sequel or not. I don't know. I feel like Miller is just not that interested in doing that sort of thing anymore, beyond a 5-6 issue arc. So
Well, he's written a lot of books that just kind of end after a first arc with a potential to continue, and I think that's just him trying to set up future avenues when he maybe runs out of ideas or just needs to cash in on something. Who knows? Not to say that that's all Mark Miller thinks about, but it seems like on the surface that's all that he thinks about.
Well, and if it's not that, it's what Netflix is asking of him.
I feel like I want to try this, but it also feels like this guy is a perfect character, so I'm interested to know what the hook would be, or the challenge in the book is. If it's just the mystery, then that's one thing, but if there's something else about his character that, is he flawed in any kind of way? You don't need to tell me, Nick, because I think you've given me 3/4 of the book at this point.
Yeah. But, I mean, like, we're at 80% really at this point.
Sure,
yeah.
Sure.
I mean, I will say the other thing that is kind of interesting is that you frequently get this glimpse into sort of like his mindscape, if you will, where you just sort of like delve into his brain, and it looks like sort of like an MC Escher drawing with stairs going everywhere, and there's like 7 or 8 different Edisons sort of standing around wearing different clothing to sort of suggest whether they're like the athletic part of him or the brainy part of him or the like the psychological part of him, and they're all kind of conversing. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that he's figured out how to channel his subconscious into, like, he can selectively target where that subconscious brain power is going, so he can have it working on different. It's crazy. Like, yeah.
Well, again, do I need to read the book now? I'm just curious.
I mean, I think you still need to read the book for the main reason I actually wanted to read the book initially, which is just great Raphael Albuquerque art.
Gotcha.
So that's that. I'll just briefly give you 30 seconds as well and say I started Usagi Yojimbo, just started it. It's by Stan Sakai. It's a book series that's older than me at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And for a while I put this off because I said, I don't know much about feudal Japan. I don't know if I want to read a book about a rabbit who's a samurai, isn't that quirky, whatever. And then I think yesterday it struck me and I went, so you'll read Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and you'll believe all of that. And all of that's perfectly fucking okay.
Yeah.
But if it's a rabbit, somehow there's a problem.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, I'm an idiot. And it's not that I haven't come to that conclusion before, but it was more just, wow, I'm an idiot again. So, I'm going to give this book a chance. Like, holy shit, for a book that came out in 84, this book looks gorgeous.
Yes. That I think has been something that I've always heard about this book, is that the art is incredibly good, even in the earlier stuff, because Stan Sakai is a very talented creator, from my understanding.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if there's anyone else who's really... I mean, come up with an example if you can, but I don't know if there's been anyone else who's dedicated so much time to the same series. Maybe like ElfQuest is like the closest thing I can think of.
ElfQuest, I mean, Hellboy started in the 90s,
yeah.
right? I mean, and even then, Eastman and Laird, I mean, but again, I think Usagi Yojimbo, like, is definitely 1984. That's crazy.
And like Hellboy works, but you kind of have to put an asterisk next to it because, like, at which point did Mike Mignola stop really writing and drawing it?
Sure, true,
right.
totally. So,
and
so
this
you're
has
saying...
always been Stan Sakai. So.
Right, okay, that was the thing I wanted to confirm. Okay, that's wild. I did not know that about this book. I would see now. I feel like we got to try this. I feel like this should be like an I read comic books deep dive. Where we should get into something like kind of out there, like Usagi Yojimbo. But yeah, I don't know. I really briefly, what I've been reading, I jumped into Immortal Hulk. I just had some back issues that I've been sitting on, and I read issues 21 through 27. This book just keeps going in all of the best ways. Like, every single time you think Ewing is wrapping up a storyline, he unpacks it a little bit further in a very good way. Like, he doesn't brush over any details, and he makes sure that, like, every single thing is covered. I think he's doing a stupendous job on this book. I can't wait to keep reading. It's so fantastic. And Joe Bennett's art is unfucking believable. It's only gotten better. And I mean, this is Joe Bennett, who in issue 1 was a top tier artist. I think as he's gone to do more and more of this weird body horror stuff that's been prevalent throughout Immortal Hulk, his art has only gotten better, and it works so well. I think there was one issue in there in the range that I read that had a guest artist, and when it switched back to Joe Bennett, I was like, oh no, this is the only artist that can work for this book. And not to say the other artist was bad, but I think, like, just Joe Bennett's specific style of line work is so crucial to a lot of the body horror stuff that I think really makes this book truly unique over at Marvel. One other quick thing I'll mention is I read Dr. Doom #1. This is by Christopher Cantwell with art by Salvador Larroca, and I've been sitting on this book for a while. I don't know why I didn't read it. I felt kind of intimidated by it because I really love Dr. Doom as a character, but I wasn't necessarily ready to jump into where Marvel had Dr. Doom at the moment, and it turns out it doesn't matter. You just need to know that Dr. Doom is running Latveria and that people welcomed him back with open arms and they wanted him to be their dictator, I guess, and it's an insane book because Kang the Conqueror shows up for no reason, and then it turns out it's a crucial reason, and Dr. Doom submits to being arrested. It's a great opening #1. I loved issue #1, so I really got to pick up the rest of the issues that have come out, and I'm very happy to know that even, especially in issue 1, Dr. Doom goes out of his way to insult Reed Richards and Tony Stark for being like slobs and lazy, and I fucking just love that about Dr. Doom. His pompous act will forever be one of my favorite things in comics. So that's what we've been reading. Let's talk about really quick what's coming out. Comic books are coming out on Christmas, December 25th, 2019. So there quite literally is not much coming out. According to League of Comic Geeks, I think there's something like 20 or 30 comics coming out. And so we as a group had to kind of go through and figure out what are we actually going to talk about today? Because while there are like new #1s, heck, I don't even think it's 20 issues that are coming out. We had to figure out what we were going to talk about today for this, but there are issues that are coming out. So I guess, Nick, I'm going to toss to you really quick. What are you excited for this Christmas week?
Well, you're correct, Michael. There's 40 books coming out this week. That's including trades and variant covers. Yeah, and I'm pretty certain 25% of those books are just variant covers of, I think it's Betty Page #1 for Dynamite. So if you were excited about that book, good news. There's a lot of options. All of them are wearing bikinis, I think, which is fine. Yeah, not a lot of options here. Honestly, it wouldn't even shock me if even less books like arrive this week and that this is just some sort of auto scheduling error. But that being said, Dial H for Hero, the trade, comes out, or should be coming out this week. That's written by Sam Humphries, art by Joe Quiones, and colors by Jordan Gibson. This is part of Bendis's Wonder Comics imprint. Personally, I'm just shocked to see Dial H in any iteration only like 6.5 years after China Melville's run under the same name for the New 52. Mm-hmm. I have a strong feeling Humphrey's book isn't quite going to be as dark as Melville's, if that's how you say his name. I just keep running into French names. Fuck me. Especially like the core dark premise of Melville's book, which I've brought up on this show before, but like the 30-second version of Dial H is it's a magic phone or a magic phone dial. If you find it and you use it, you get powers of some random superhero. The catch, of course, is that you don't know and can't control what power set you'll get. China Melville's run was just wonderful and dark because a little bit into the run, you realize that it's not just about getting a random power set. It's actually about somewhere in the multiverse, somewhere in the universe, when you dial up a power set, you're actually taking those powers away from the usual bearer of those powers, and chaos ensues because of it. I don't think this will be that dark. This just involves a teenager named Miguel Montez. He finds the H-dial. Bad guys want it, because why wouldn't you want it? And he heads off on a fun road trip to deliver it to the one person he thinks that can keep it safe, Superman. So clearly there's some bad decision-making that's already happening this far into the book. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm just absolutely shocked that DC is doing Dial H in any capacity. Like, for me, Dial H is one of those properties that, like, it feels like one of those DC properties that gets trotted out every, like, 20 years or something like that, where people are like, well, we have this, so the fact that it's, like, showing up not even a decade after the last time, I'll take Dial H in any form. So, you know.
Gotcha. Sounds cool. Kait, what about you? What are you excited for this week? Or not this week?
Yeah, I cheated. I'm sorry. There was nothing coming out that I was terribly excited about on Christmas, or even that I'm aware of the week of New Year's. So I chose something that comes out on January 8th, a couple weeks from now, and surprise, surprise, it's a Firefly book. It's Firefly Outlaw, Ma Reynolds #1 by Greg Pak, David Gianfelice, and Ethan Young. And yeah, it's about Mal's mom, who's an outlaw. And the cover shows Ma Reynolds holding a smoking shotgun, and Mal is basically hiding behind her in a store. And
Okay, so Boom is just pounding out these Firefly books, right? That's what I'm understanding?
Yeah, like the last one was about a heist with all of the lady characters from the ship, and this one's about Ma Reynolds. And I'm only following Firefly in trade because I end up getting so behind in comics anyway. I might as well have the nice, beautiful hardcovers on my shelf. So it's probably going to be a little while before I actually read this one, but I'm so excited about all of these like crazy stories that they're coming up with.
Oh, yeah. I mean, what a wild concept. Especially, like, I would have never expected to see a book about Captain Reynolds' mom.
I mean, it's just crazy when you consider that all of this has been built on the backs of one season of a show, and not even that long of a season, and a movie.
Yeah.
That's just crazy. I'm sure more has been made of less, but still crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's impressive. I think, like, that, especially that there's still, like, a fan base. Like, obviously, Kait is all on board for this stuff, so it's like, I mean, I think there's more than just one person out there. Like, there's obviously an audience for this. So, I mean, Kait, have you read any of the stuff that's come out since Boom got the license for this?
I've only read Volume 1. And
okay.
Volume 2 is sitting at my LCS waiting for me to pick it up. And then I think I have the heists book with the ladies in it, but I haven't gotten to it under my pile of the Goodreads challenge books.
Okay. Well, I guess the question was, did you like Volume 1 that you've read so far? I maybe have asked this on a previous episode, but I'm still curious.
Yeah, it was a big change from what Dark Horse was doing because it covers Mal and Zoe in the war. That's the backstory to the show. So
Right.
it's a big shift, but it's still I think that they were still true to Mal and Zoe as characters, and I'm looking forward to reading more about the rest of the characters that weren't in the book.
That's exciting. I guess to a certain extent. I mean, I feel like there's going to eventually be just a huge backlog of Firefly stuff for people who one day discover the show in like 2050 and they're like, oh, that was really cool. Whatever happened to that? And then Kate's going to open up her chest full of Firefly comics and say, don't you worry, I've got you covered. That's how Kate's going to talk in the future too. Well, for me this week, I'm actually picking a book that's supposed to come out on Christmas Day, and this is East of West number 45 by Jonathan Hickman and Nick Dragata, and the end of times is coming as far as I'm concerned. I'm a couple issues behind on this book, but we are in the middle of the final arc of East of West. The whole series is going to be done, and I don't know what that means. I'm very scared to see what the end of times means. Like, I worry that if this book ends, the actual world is going to end. I feel like Jonathan Hickman has that kind of power now. Marvel has given him way too much, and now he can actually end the universe as we know it. So I'm excited for this. I'm also kind of sad because I really love this book, but you know, all good things have to come to an end, especially in comic books. Unless you are the Marvel or DC universe, then we just keep going forever and ever. But I'm happy to see that this book is getting like the time that it needs to actually come to an end, and I'm excited to catch up in like a big swath of comics. Maybe I'll do a full reread of East of West. I figure if I did a full reread of Chew, I can reread anything now. There's no limitations. Nothing is as long as Chew that I have in my backlog of like, I need to reread this. With the exception of Usagi no Jimbo, if I decide to Usagi no Jimbo. I don't know how to fucking say this book's name. That's the only book that I probably won't be able to read all of it. Or ElfQuest, as much as I want to. I want to read all of ElfQuest, but boy, oh boy, that's a lot of comics. But we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to be talking about the Goodreads Book of the Month, as voted on by the fantastic people over at our Goodreads group. So we'll take a break, and we'll be back in a second. Show this week, we are talking about our Goodreads Book of the Month as voted on by the fantabulous human beings that are over at the Goodreads group. That's Goodreads. If you're not on it, you got to join it. You can go to ircbpodcast.com/Goodreads and join our group right now and start getting in on this discussion and this voting. And then you can listen to books, hear us talk about books that you voted on or even suggested. In the case of this week's episode, we are talking about Comics for a Strange World, a book of poorly drawn lines by Reza Farazmand. And this is a book that I just want to get out of the way to begin with. This is a book of collected strips. So that means, this person, Reza, had posted all of these books, posted all these comics on their website where you could read them strip by strip, week to week, or day to day, or however often, they publish things. And this is a collected edition of a chunk of those books, as well as, so according to the description on Amazon, 100 pages of extra content. So I think, stuff from online and then some original stuff to incentivize you to go buy this book. So if you're looking for a holistic narrative story, you're not going to get it with this book because it's just a collection of single page or maybe 2-page strips that have a punchline every single time. So reading through this, you're kind of just getting bit after bit after bit after bit, which can be good and can be bad. So, I'm going to open up the discussion floor to Nick and Kait. What did you guys think of this collected volume of strips?
I definitely had a hard time switching from reading comics that have a specific narrative to reading a collection of single panels that don't have an ongoing narrative. Okay. I enjoy comic strips in general. Like if I scroll past them on social media or read them in a newspaper 10 years ago or
right. Who still gets the paper?
yeah. If I see a panel as a single panel like this specific comic, I do see it occasionally on like Pinterest or Reddit or something, then I enjoy it. But to sit down and read it in an hour, like the whole thing back to back, was a little rough.
Yeah, Yeah, I definitely felt the same way. Like it was definitely a book that I picked up and put down a couple times just because I felt a little overwhelmed with just the constant joke after joke after joke. But I don't know, Nick, what did you think?
Well, thinking about it now, what's kind of interesting is that, I'm now running through the idea in my head of, collected books of comic strips sometimes don't really bug you, and what kind of, didn't really jive with me about this one. And I think part of it is just that, like, even if you have a collected book of, say, something like Foxtrot or Garfield even, there can tend to be a narrative arc that goes through the daily strips. Maybe the arc is a week, maybe the arc is 2 weeks. And so there's a sense of continuity and even a sense that the comic strip writer, artist can sort of flesh out a longer playing story, right? And I think part of the problem with this book is that there's not really any of that. There are some minor callbacks. There are a few characters that return from here to there, but there isn't really a big payoff in terms of that. And so really what you end up is just a lot of very different cartoons just kind of smashed next to each other across these pages. And I think sometimes what that does is it, even if the strip is good, like it really doesn't give the strip a chance to breathe, because you're just, fucking turn into the next page and you're just running into the next one anyway. So you don't like sort of get a chance to really sit with it unless you're imposing that upon yourself. And I'm sure some people are saying out there, well, Nick, what about the Far Side then? That was just one panel and it didn't really have arcs and shit. And the Far Side was a unique piece of genius work. So how dare you? So,
it's interesting that you say that, because I was also thinking about, well, what about other books that are just kind of strips, right? Mm-hmm. And I like that you brought up the idea of a maybe overarching narrative that didn't necessarily require you to read all of them, but if you did, there was a slight payoff, such as in Garfield.
Definitely.
Or even something like Nimona, for instance. I mean, that's a book that I think we champion pretty hard on this series or on this podcast. And Nimona is a series of short comics or strips in some ways, like one-page comics or multi-page comics that really, like, there is an overarching story, but if you read them one-off with the idea of knowing who the characters are, like if you knew who Garfield and Jim and whatever the fucking the dog's name was, if you knew Odie, if you knew who those characters were, like you could read those one-off, even if you knew there was an overarching story, like Garfield eventually eating all of Jim's body and organs and mind, such as the subreddit that's out there implies. But that's totally unrelated. I guess what I'm trying to say is, without that even a remote sense of narrative or anything, this book does kind of fall a little bit flat, especially, at least for me, because a lot of the comics didn't really hit home. Like a lot of them were kind of just like, oh, like it just ended, or the joke kind of fell flat for me, and that seemed to happen like over large groups of pages. And I did have some strips that I really enjoyed. I jotted some of them down in our notes, and we will go through that in a little bit, but I mean, on the whole, I'm not really huge on strip comics. Like even when I was reading them in the newspaper, back when I was in high school working at lunch and I didn't have anything to read, I would pick up a newspaper and just read the Sunday comics. And I mean, those are funny because I'm reading them once a week. And I think, to go back to your point of, none of these had time to breathe, I think that's what makes this webcomic really work, is that maybe you weren't getting comics every day or multiples in a row. You were getting them maybe once or twice or 3 times a week, and you could like come back to them and having not thought about them for a day or two. And that's what made it funny. I'd be curious to know if there's anyone out there who binge read all of these comics like online and really got a kick out of it, because I feel like the like slight humor that you get out of some of them overall just becomes kind of mediocre as the story goes, like as the book goes on. As you start to binge a bunch of these, you kind of go, oh, I don't know how funny a lot of these are. And that's unfortunate, because I think that when the comic does work really well, or when the single strip does work really well, it's fucking hilarious. It's just unfortunate that I don't think that a lot of them really hit home, or maybe that's just me. Kait, I don't know if you had the same feeling. I feel like you maybe approach this in a different direction than Nick and I.
I don't know. I went into this, like I said before, I've run into a couple of these panels online here and there, and I enjoyed it. So I was looking forward to this, and I kind of knew what I was getting into. The one thing that really hung me up for about half of the book is that some of these panels are 2 to 3 pages, but there's absolutely nothing to indicate that the next page is not a different panel. So for a little while, I was like, wait,
Right.
is this just the same characters and a different joke? Or is this a totally different panel and it's supposed to stand alone by itself? And then only some of the panels had titles. So
Right,
although it
yeah.
helped when the next one was a title, it didn't help when I was trying to figure out that, these 3 pages are the same joke.
And because the art style is so basic, it's difficult to like try to spot contextual identifiers that would indicate whether or not it's the same strip or not.
The art style did work for me for this type of comic.
Yeah, I agree. I actually really enjoyed the very simple, static kind of feel of everything. Like that makes it work for me as a strip. Totally.
I'm kind of torn on this because I feel like there's kind of some sort of aesthetic in the webcomic community. I don't know if I'd call it like a house aesthetic, but it sort of feels like there's this real minimalist look that's kind of, like I said, sort of a house style, and I feel like this kind of embodies that. And I'm not saying it's bad, but
I'm not saying it's bad, but it's not good.
This does seem in line with a lot of the other ones that I feel are all kind of consciously or not chasing the oatmeal money. For those who aren't aware, the oatmeal is that webcomic that has spawned 18 million books and card games and whatever. So
We did have a comment from a Goodreads member named Adam, and he said the art as advertised is very simple or poor by the author's own admission, and that's one of the things I love about it. And he also said that it's gotten better or cleaner over time, proving that practice really does make perfect, or at least better. And I have to agree with that. I mean, I think that this style works for the comic, and I can see how once the artist has selected that style, they would just lean into it. I think that the lettering in particular really worked for me. I mean, I actually couldn't tell if it's hand lettered or a font. And because it's so consistent and reasonably clean, even though it does look like pencil strokes or brush strokes.
Yeah, I think, I mean, to go back to what Nick was saying, like the quote unquote house style, I think that, the simple drawing style is there for a specific reason.
Yeah.
In that, it's hard to make a comic, especially if you've got a comic coming out a handful of times a week. You really have to draw as simple as possible. Otherwise, you fall prey to the thing that plagues every webcomic that's ever existed, not delivering on time. And especially if you're trying to make bits, I mean, you look at other comics that are pretty popular, like Alex Norris's webcomic name, which is the quote-unquote Oh No comic, where it's just a blob and something happens, and at the end it's always said, someone is always saying, oh no. I think, or if you look at Extra Fabulous Comics, for instance, that's another very simple style that the creator, just draws with a pen and pencil, and it's very simple, like characters, very I would say very similar in style to Poorly Drawn Lines, and I think it's, again, because they need to be able to churn these out many in advance, probably in order to schedule, to make sure they don't fall behind, because that is the one thing that kills a webcomic. It's constant delivery. And there's
no denying that as much as we might say a comic is simple, crude, basic, poorly drawn, no pun intended. No matter how much we might have an idea or estimate how long it takes to create that strip, it's always going to be longer. It's always going to be a more difficult process and a more arduous one than what you or I could imagine. Even though there's the real temptation to look at some things and go, I could do that. Well, you probably could, but you also don't have any fucking clue how long it took that guy to do it.
Right, and I don't think that we're saying that the art style here is bad. I think it is just it's a simpler art style than, say, what we're used to in major Western comics, specifically when we're looking at the big two, or we're looking at there's just a heavy amount of detail that you're not going to get in a strip comic, because the idea of a strip comic, specifically in the case of Poorly Drawn Lines, is not necessarily to tell a narrative story, but to tell a story that is shareable, can go viral, and is simple enough that someone can take it in a second on their mobile phone or something like that. I mean, that is, I think, the there is some sort of I talked to a friend of mine, Kyle, he's an artist that's worked on a handful of different things, and his big thing when he was working on his strip comic was he needed to make it short enough that someone can consume it very quickly, and it also has the potential to be super shareable as well as super relatable, and I think that's what they were going for. Farazmand, I think, was definitely trying to create a bunch of comics that you could go, oh yeah, that's me, or you could send to a friend and go, it you, in your chat of choice that you prefer. It's really funny. I mean, there was one in specific that I put in my notes here, like page 172. I was like, this is me and Nick, and it's because it's two people just fighting with each other because they're friends, but they also hate each other at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the Shapes Club comic for anyone that's interested, and I think it's very, very funny. But like again, there was a handful of these in here that I really enjoyed. I had a lot of fun with some of the jokes that were put in the book, and I don't know if you guys had any particular comic bits that really stood out for you in this book, but I didn't think that on the whole this was like a bad book. I just think that as a collection of strips, like I don't think this is necessarily something you should sit down and read in a sitting like I did. I think it's something that you should put on a coffee table and just kind of pick up every once in a while, or have someone look at and say, oh look, this is a really funny strip. Or maybe you just wanted to buy it to support the creator, and that's totally understandable as well.
Well, and I think a lot of that just boils down to the simple fact that comedy is tough and it's really hard to do, and I think it's even more difficult in a medium where you don't have intonation and voices to help you, and you can try to control the pacing via page breaks and panel sequencing, but that doesn't factor in the fact that some readers read massively faster than others. Other readers don't take in the same amount of information, as other people do. And so just comedy is it's really hard to do, and I think sometimes where this book seems to consistently misstep is just not having as long of a build-up, and maybe blah, 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 ha, Fortnite millennials, everything's on fire. Maybe this is just another reflection of people just having shortened attention spans, and the author is merely just trying to play to that. But for me, it was some of the longer strips, especially like the one about Sturb's package, right? Where he gets the package for the guy named Sturb, and it's not him, and he throws it away. Yeah. And then Sturb shows up, and the only natural solution is to throw him away too. Like that worked for me, and I think it's because the joke had more of an arc. It had a little bit more of a build-up. There was a bit of time to just sort of anticipate what was going to happen, as opposed to like panel 1, panel 2, panel 3 were done.
Yeah, Lenny in our Goodreads group pretty much said the same thing about the difficulty of humor in comics. She said, you're essentially creating comedic timing between the space between panels, and the joke has to have both visual and written strength for it to land, which I have to agree with. I mean, if you're missing one of those, it's not going to work out when they're your only ingredients.
Yeah, and I think some of the jokes in this could have landed better with an extra panel or two. Like, and I'm saying that, like, again, not necessarily knowing how this would work, but I think there are a handful of comics that are just like 4 panels, and to me, when it comes down to panel or comics like that, and you have 2 characters talking, you need to put them both in one panel to have the conversation, or you essentially run out of time for the joke to land. Like, you need an extra beat in order for there to be like a comedic timed hit. And again, I'm speaking out of my ass only from my own understanding of how all this works, but there's just a handful like that I was like, oh, if only we had a little bit more to this, could have worked better. And I mean, I see that in even like Alex Norris and Extra Fabulous Comics, the 2 other that I really am familiar with. Sometimes the jokes in those comics don't land because there isn't an extra beat of panel. And you'll see them try to experiment with different layouts and stuff like that in order to try to fix that, I think. Like, for instance, Extra Fabulous Comics, I know that he goes back in some of his comics that he wants to improve upon or were kind of funny, he will go back and redraw them, and to try to improve them, he'll change the layout, he'll add extra panels and stuff for the quote-unquote finalized version, because I'm guessing at some point he's going to put out a published book and it's going to have these finalized styled comics, because normally what he does is he publishes like basic pen and inks, and then when he does these like upgraded version, they actually have like minor color and they're like clearly digitally edited versus just having a scanned in copy of like a piece of paper. So yeah, I mean, it's obviously a very tough thing. I think like none of us are necessarily experts on it, but as consumers, we can always look at this stuff and kind of try to give it some critical feedback. And I don't know. I think there are a lot of places in this book where things work, and a lot of them where things fall flat. Yeah, I think this is a weird book because a collection of strips to me just doesn't work. But that's just me.
I think some of it might just boil down to the way in which the strips were organized in the book, honestly. And it's hard for me to put my finger on, but I think maybe in some cases it would have helped if strips that did tend to use the same characters or whatever, if they were obviously put together. But I don't know, like, I think the book had like 4 themes or 4 chapters, and for me, it just felt really arbitrary in terms of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, I think some of it really just is like, yeah, this guy has certain themes that he likes to riff on, and if you're reading this once a week or something like that, then maybe it just doesn't become really evident. But if you're like marathoning this whole book in an hour, like, you sort of start to come up with a short list of, well, these are the 7 things that, like, this book seems to really encompass.
Mm-hmm.
And it just becomes much more blindingly obvious, as opposed to creating a desire for, a strip that you won't see for another month or something like that.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I was like, okay, we get it. Like, the internet's bad, people are stupid, cats hate everyone, technology has ruined us, and an obligatory joke about drinking tea, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I can sarcastically say that having marathoned the book, but if I was just reading this once a week, I don't think I would come away going like I've got your number, buddy. Like, I get it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the categorization thing that you talked about doesn't necessarily help that, right? Because the panels, they're broken up into 4 chunks, and they're all kind of centered around a specific theme, and it feels like that was intentional, right? Obviously, it was intentional. They put all the stories that take place featuring birds and different animals and stuff talking to each other into a section. There's a whole section about technology. There's a whole section about humans are weird, and so you kind of start to see some of those themes a little bit clearer. I don't know if that in particular was the intention of the author to say like, oh, you can see kind of how all of my jokes are formulated. But like I agree that some of that is kind of easy to take away. But again, all of those themes that you talked about, I mean, you've got a couple more than in your list here, but I mean, those seem to be the prevalent jokes of the internet. I don't think that's unique to this specific comic.
It's the prevalent jokes of a lot of webtoons, and beyond that, yeah, it's just, these are the things that people who partake in a lot of internet media, it's the things that they're obsessed with too. So,
right.
It's not just a criticism, it's just merely the fact that when you're, full tilt running through this book, it becomes a lot easier to go like, okay, like I've got this figured out, even though it's unfair to be like, wow, you can't talk about the internet being bad, like someone's already done it, right? That's just stupid.
Right. Well, and I guess to flip that note, was there anything that you liked about this book? I mean, were there any comics that you liked about this book?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably my favorite, and I feel like, unfortunately, I think it resonates with me because it probably is me, and so it was like, at the end, it was a laugh followed by like personal introspection and disgust. Was the moment where the guy goes, "I'm mad," and the other guy goes, "Here's a solution." So I think that's you, Mike. That's you. Here's
that's
a solution. Me. And then I go, "I don't want a solution. I want to be mad." And I was like, "Fuck."
Yes, the one that I was talking about between me and Nick was I'm a circles person, and the other guy says I'm a squares person. And actually, let me actually pull this up because it's very funny to me. The guy says, I like squares and I prefer circles, but we still respect each other. And the guy's pushing his square to the other guy's face. Get that dirty bullshit out of my face. Because that's me and Nick. I mean, there were some good moments. I don't know, Kait, I want you to jump in here. Was there any particular strip that tickled you as you were reading this?
I really enjoyed the page 4 panel just immediately as I opened the book, and I could see framing this and putting it in one of my 3 tea cabinets. There's 4 panels, and it's the same guy with a growing beard with 4 different things in front of him, and it says, it started with coffee, soon became energy drinks, and then it moved to harder things, and eventually tea.
And the harder things are like cocaine and heroin.
Yeah. I've never done harder things.
I mean, the scary thing is I think we all know people, provided you omit the hard drug step. I mean, I think that, like, that's their arc. Like, that's
me.
them.
And
yeah,
you,
exactly.
you notice, guys, that the beard has grown. Like, that is my life. I went from coffee to energy drinks, and we're not going to talk about my hard drugs phase. On to tea. That's all that I can drink now is tea and soda water. So, I mean, I get it. I totally understand it. As I said, some of these comics, you can very much say, it me.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think for me, the other one that another one I really relate with is just 169, where the bear says, I finished all my work at the last minute. I didn't even use caffeine, just good old-fashioned desperation. And I think for those of us who have tried, successfully or not, to get off of caffeine, we're so proud of ourselves, but then we realize that it's just us, like, clinging onto the, edge of our chair to get things done. So, I mean, I really liked that. The one where, like, the parent goes, what is that, on page 35, where the parent says something like, what did you draw? And the baby shows him and he drew, like, Big Bird, and the parent says, yeah, that's plagiarism, like, you're going to jail or whatever. Like, I think people being punished for things that they shouldn't be punished for is just, like, that's, for some reason putting a baby in jail is, like, my jam. So whatever that says about me, like, I loved it. So
I think it was very good social commentary about the state of intellectual property on the internet.
Yes.
Very well done in 3 panels.
One of the ones that I really liked. Again, and it's funny because I think some of these, like, we talked about, some of these beats don't hit after like 3 panels or 4 panels or something. But some of the ones that I did really like were very short. Page 63, for instance, the goat, he screams like a man, and there's just a goat, and he says, "I'm so tired." And the next panel is, "I'm so tired all the time." Something about that just really hit me, and I feel like Xander could totally relate, because that sounds like him. That's why he fills himself up with caffeine and energy drinks, and eventually he's going to turn to hard drugs, guys. We should all be worried about him. He just hasn't grown that beard yet. So
buy him some tea for Christmas so that he skips that phase.
Yeah, we'll just skip him right into phase 4. I think there are a lot of really good strips in that. I think we've been pretty critical of this book, but there are some really good stuff in this book. It's just a matter of, kind of getting through it all to find those. And I think a lot of these ones, like, I know that some of them I read in here that I thought were pretty funny were things that I had seen on the internet before, like, that had been shared around or retweeted or something like that, or posted on Reddit. And because I think, like, this creator does a pretty good job of creating a very specific, like, styled comic with a very, dry, sarcastic tone to everything, which is, again, can be a very popular thing on the internet. I think there are a lot of strips out there that do that, but this one is successful because I think it has a style to it that I think a lot of people can easily, again, say, like, I relate to this. Like, I very much can relate to this, because despite the simplistic nature, and maybe even just maybe 2 animals talking, it is still able to convey that dry sense of humor that is, I think, very pervasive on the internet. And I think obviously this is what this is aimed at.
Yeah, which is kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like a catch-22, because honestly, I think having this in, like, book form and the way it's organized, like, I think it doesn't do a real... I think it doesn't really put the best foot forward in terms of consuming and enjoying this content. I think if this was something you had once a week, I think you would probably enjoy more. But then I think the catch of that is, I think that this book, in terms of aesthetic, in terms of layout, in terms of approachability, I think this is something that you could feel comfortable handing to people who aren't as familiar or, used to reading comics. And I think that those people would probably enjoy this book. So yeah, I don't know.
I mean, like I said before, I think this is a good coffee table book. I don't fucking understand what coffee table books really are, in that who the fuck has a coffee table that they just leave books on like this?
They gotta weigh 7 pounds and have glossy photos. That's pretty much... Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I just, but again, I think that description of it isn't necessarily a bad one. It's like a book that you kind of pick up and skim through every once in a while.
And that's exactly it. That's exactly it. You just pick up and you skim once in a while. You hit the nail on the head. That's where this book, I think, would shine.
That's a much nicer way of saying this is a great book for your bathroom, like is what I wrote in our notes.
Sure. I mean, I think that that's true, and I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. Right? Because if you said that about, like, you know, a big 2 comic, I think that would be a little strange. But something like this that is just something you don't necessarily need to invest a lot of time in or to get a lot out of it, is the perfect, like, descriptor. Like, it's something that you just skim, and I don't think that is a detriment to the book, because, like, you don't necessarily want to do what we did for this group, which is read it all in a sitting, because then you kind of feel like overwhelmed with jokes and bits, and when you start comparing the better ones to the not so better ones, you really start to kind of draw a line of, like, is this book even good, compared to if you skim it and you kind of get a little bit of laugh out of yourself. You'll go, oh, this is a really fun little book that I just have laying around. I think that, to me, is the conclusion to take away from this, is that this isn't a book for binge reading. This is a book for skimming when you have time. You know, if you got 10 minutes, take a few comics in.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, now that this has crossed my brain, I think a lot of the utility in a book like this comes from people who have already enjoyed the strips, simply having them consolidated in physical form. And, you know, I don't know what the percentage would be of sales on something like that, but I have to imagine a lot of the people buying this are already familiar with the content. And so for them, like, they already know that they like it, you know?
Yeah, or they maybe read one comic and they were like, hey, this is, you know, I'm going to buy this for a friend of mine because I thought that was really funny.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a great gift. I think it was like $11 or $12 on Amazon. So if you know, you have a friend's Christmas that you're doing after, you know, Christmas, you know, this is a perfect book if you can get it shipped in the hellish time that is post-Christmas Amazon shipping or whatever. At least it was $12 on Amazon. Go to your local bookstore. Go to your local somewhere and pick this up instead. That would be much better than buying from Amazon, I think. Anyways, I guess, do you guys have any final thoughts about this? Do you have other like strip comic books like this, like collected editions of strips that you would recommend to people?
I used to read the Garfield collected editions all the time when I was like 7.
Okay.
Oh,
It's somewhere in my apartment. I have a copy of Garfield minus Garfield, the collected edition, which is just the collection of Garfield comics, but someone edited out Garfield in all of them, and it's very funny because it's just Jim being crazy. I remember that. That was a fun Tumblr.
Yeah, I think that we should do an episode where we do a bunch of research and read a bunch of books like this and then talk about collected webcomics. I'm up for it.
Oh, brother. I don't know if I could do that. This book was, I mean, it was honestly tough to get through because of just how many little gags there were, and the ones that didn't work really put me off. So, yeah, I mean, we could do it, Kait. I just am going to come at it with a real salty mindset.
Well, you know what's kind of funny is, like, I was thinking about, you know, I didn't thoroughly enjoy this book, but I also didn't thoroughly hate it. But in terms of other web comics that are out there, I think for me, like, a lot of the stuff that works is the stuff over at Webtoons, which is like the complete polar opposite.
Yes.
It's like hyper serialized, right? Like,
yes.
That's the stuff where you miss one and...
Well, sort of, because I think Shen, like, for instance, Shen Comics, he does like longer strip style comics, right? Or he'll do small strips. But I think for the most part, 95% of Webtoon is serialized comics, but just done in a different format than like Western page turn comics.
Right, yeah. So,
but I think
that's interesting.
The thing to bring up about that, though, is that the strip comics that do well over there do have a certain thing about them that makes them work, right? Like Sarah's Scribbles, for instance, is a strip comic that's like relatable AF, if we have to use the terminology of the internet. And I think, something like Shen Comics is another example. Shucks, there was another one that I had on the top of my head that I can't.
What's the other one that everyone always talks about? Was it my tall gamer boyfriend? No, my giant gamer boyfriend?
Yeah, well, that one, yeah, my giant nerd boyfriend is a big one, but that's more of a like autobiographical narrative story, because she does do like ongoing like things.
Right, and I think that's why it works. Like, it hits
Sure.
the sweet spot between being semi-serialized and yet also you can consume one and share it, and it's super shareable.
Right, and it's again, it has that potential to go viral. There's some meme culture in there. Like, it's got a lot. Like, she really hits the nail on the head when it comes to all that stuff. And I think Shen does the exact same thing. Like, his comics are super relatable. He does a lot of stuff that I think hits internet culture right on the head. But it helps that he's been doing it for like 500 strips, and he took like a year off, and there's still like a plethora of his content to get through. But to your point, Nick, Webtoon I think is a great place to kind of consolidate a lot of this stuff. I don't think, like, for instance, this Poorly Drawn Lines is not on there, and I think a lot of like independent webcomic artists haven't put their stuff up there. And the reason why I don't know, I think there might be some ownership issues or something like that.
I've heard
who knows?
that it's been intimated, that there are some
like IP
the creators
things
who don't put their stuff on there have a reason for it.
Yeah. I don't know. I think Kait, I don't know. Are there any other webcomics out there that you'd recommend to folks? I don't know if you're reading anything that is in this kind of strip style.
I really don't read that many webcomics other than the occasional panel on Pinterest. So unfortunately, I don't. But I'd like to read more.
Well, Nick's got a whole plethora of webtoons that he could send you. I know it.
Oh God!
Okay, well,
true.
I appreciate you guys taking the time to read this book. I know it had its ups and downs, but I appreciate the discussion here. I really want to know if you read this and you aren't on the Goodreads group, jump over there on Goodreads. We're still talking about it through the end of the month. So if you have any comments, please drop them in there. But otherwise, for now, you can follow us all on Twitter. You can follow Kait at Kait Elfier. You can follow Nick at Death Star Plans. You can follow me at Mike Rappin, and you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast on Twitter and on Instagram. I try to post there whenever I can. Our Instagram's fallen behind because December's been a weird, crazy month for me.
So for those not aware, the show is powered by fans like you on Patreon. You can find our Patreon at patreon.com/IRCB podcast. If you join now, you can get access to exclusive audio, articles, previews of the IRCB schedule, early access to Top of My Pile posts, and so much more. We would also encourage you to check out our Goodreads group. It's a lovely community of comic friends. You can join our yearly reading challenge. You can comment on our weekly threads. There's a whole lot going on over there. That's at ircbpodcast.com/Goodreads.
Head over to ircbpodcast.com for our pronunciation guide, Discord server, zines, merchandise, and everything else IRCB. If you haven't already, please rate and review our show 5 stars on Amazon,
5 stars
on iTunes, Spotify, and beyond, and we'll read your review in the next episode. Email the show with what you've been reading, recipes, corrections, etc. at ircbpodcast@gmail.com.
Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all the music for our show. We love them so very, very much. Their new album is stupendous. You should go check that out at infinityshred.com or on their Bandcamp. Xander is a high wizard. He's a great friend. He's a great DM and a person that's just fun to be around. He and I worked on editing this episode. I'll tell you that in advance. I want to say thank you to Kait. I want to say thank you to Nick for being here this week. I appreciate you guys digging into this book with me. And thank you to all the Goodreads folks out there who voted and nominated and had discussion on the Goodreads group with us. It's always fantastic. Really love all you folks out on Discord. If you're not on our Discord, make sure you join it. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you. Is going on with The Witcher?
What?
Is that animated or is it?
It's real life. Oh no, you got to see every single curvature of Henry Cavill's muscly body. He's so muscly, according to the costume designer, that his muscles wore down the leather underneath his clothes.
Well, if it's anything like the games, it should just be him having sex with everyone. Which, I mean,
yeah, that is, it's true.
Where did you hear that?
I saw it on the internet. So it has to be true.